There are plenty of concerns regarding the Buffalo Bills defense entering the playoffs. What are the keys to maximizing the performance of the unit? We're breaking that down for you today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm joined now by Anthony Prohaska of Cover One. You can follow him on Twitter at pro__ant. One of my favorite people to talk football with. And with the playoffs coming, the Bills are in, obviously, number 2 seed in the AFC. We don't know who they're going to play, but one thing we do know is there's plenty of concerns out there about this defense. And if it's going to be too limiting for the Bills to go on the run that we all hope for them to go on. And so Anthony and I today are going to break down all the major talking points as it relates to this Bills defense. So Anthony, welcome in, and I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, me too. I was pumped when you reached out, and I'm always excited every time we do a show together, whether I have you on mine or I jump over here, and especially around this topic. Yeah, it's been interesting treading in the Bills' defensive waters for the past couple of weeks on social and within episodes. Yeah, a lot of emotion and an important piece. So I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Well, we're going to kind of frame this in 3 segments. Segment 1, I want to talk about some individual player stuff. In segment 2, I want to get into some group stuff. And then in segment 3, we're going to talk about the unit in general, kind of big overarching themes as it relates to the entire defense. But we are starting with the individual components. And I think there's 3 different decisions that the Bills have to make. Who's going to start at linebacker next to Terrell Bernard? Who's starting at safety next to Taylor Rapp? And who or which 5 defensive tackles are going to be active on game days in the postseason? Let's start with linebacker. Matt Milano's back, and he was back for a couple games, missed one with the groin, came back against the Jets. I thought the Jets game was really strong, Anthony. I thought it looked a lot like Matt Milano, particularly the run defense. Very, very strong processing, getting downhill, quick trigger, playing through contact, getting off blocks. He looked good, and I think his coverage has been good since he's been back. Not that he's made plays in coverage, but he's where he's supposed to be. He's taking routes off the menu. He's forcing the quarterback to continue to work through the progression. And so the question is, all right, Terrell Bernard, surely your Mike linebacker, your team captain, he's starting. Dorian Williams obviously has grown a ton. I think he went from, and I said this earlier in the week on the podcast, I think he went from a guy that wasn't playable last year, so much so that the Bills called A.J. Klein out of a family, trip to come in and play in the postseason over Dorian Williams. I mean, fast, athletic, urgent player, but processing wasn't there. I think he's gone from a player that you couldn't play to, oh, man, this guy's really making an impact, physical, downhill. The coverage is a lot better. He's not getting fooled as much with false keys and misdirection. He's made some plays. And here we are on the doorstep of the postseason, and it's fair to ask the question, should it be Matt Milano next to Bernard, or should it be Williams next to Bernard? I'm much more encouraged out of this Jets game. I'm feeling like it probably should be Milano, but I'm curious to hear where you're at on this conversation.
I'm on the Milano train too. I think with each subsequent game from the time that he debuted, he's gotten a little bit better each time. And I think that's understandable, right? Like, you have to knock off the rust. You really didn't get a training camp or a preseason or anything. You're coming off of one major injury. So you're trying to come back from that. And then you get essentially another major injury. So you're trying to work back from both. And he's still got to get into game shape and get in the flow of everything. But I echo your sentiments completely. He looked much closer to, previous or pre-injury Matt Milano against the Jets, the way he was triggering, coming downhill, taking on blocks, feeling, Joe Tippmann is climbing to the second level and his eyes are on Breece Hall, but he's feeling Tippmann using his hands and shedding him and staying clean and meeting Breece in the hole and popping him. A couple of really good plays against the run. You mentioned what he's been in terms of coverage and responsibility there. So I am in the Milano camp. I'm going with Milano and Bernard just because he has gotten better each game. He's looking closer to himself. That physical ability is starting to come around. His play recognition, his communication, his knowledge, his experience, his savvy, I think that makes him such an asset, more so than Dorian Williams. And though, I agree with you, Dorian has improved a lot. I was not too disappointed when AJ Klein played the playoffs because I thought, for what he lacked athletically, he was miles ahead of Dorian from a processing standpoint and reading and recognition standpoint. Dorian's improved that way. I like the idea of if they have to go base, Dorian can be that third linebacker on the field, especially from a run responsibility standpoint. I do worry about him still a little bit from a coverage standpoint and still being somewhat susceptible to misdirection and eye candy. But, kudos to him for being in a playable situation, like you said, and making this a conversation. But for me, it's still Milano, especially with how he's been trending recently. If he hadn't looked as good as he did against the Jets, I may be more inclined to entertain the idea of a timeshare or more Dorian Williams worked into it. But I think Milano's starting to turn that corner.
Yeah, and the Bills since the Detroit game have shown somewhat of an appetite for playing three linebackers. And with Dorian Williams to go with Milano and Bernard, you feel like you have three guys that are worth getting on the field. I'm not sure the Bills have really been in that position where you felt like there was a worthy third linebacker to really be more willing to match personnel. So we land on the same place there, which hopefully Bills Mafia that's listening, and maybe you disagree, understand we put in the work. We've watched these two players a ton every snap, and this is where we both land. And so it's actually been a pivot for me. A couple weeks ago I was thinking, man, I think Dorian might have to be right now the best option. I don't know that you can take the time right now to let Milano play his way into form, but the Jets game was that encouraging. That gives me a lot of hope. Let's now talk about safeties, and this is really fascinating because Damar Hamlin's had this rib injury, dude. He's been out for a minute. And that's opened up the opportunity for Cole Bishop to get into the lineup. And Cole Bishop against Houston earlier this season was rough. But he's gotten the chance to play now and stack a few starts together. There's been a lot of comfort. And I've enjoyed seeing him play in the box and come downhill and tackle. He's got a lot of range and athleticism. I think there's a certain floor that exists with Damar Hamlin in the lineup. But Cole Bishop gives you a more of a ceiling. He's also likely your guy. I mean, surely he's the guy next to Rapp as a second-round pick next year, and, of course, Rapp being a 3-year extension. Is the future now, right, for the Bills at safety, or is it, okay, if Hamlin's back, put him in there, keeping in mind the guy's not played in a game and it feels like over a month?
Yeah, this one's a really interesting one. I talked about it on the show earlier this week, and it was literally like the juxtaposition of fans. Yeah, every other was like, oh, it's got to be Hamlin. And then after that, I was like, well, it's got to be Bishop. And it was just back and forth and back and forth. I am slightly torn on it. I'm not the biggest Damar Hamlin guy. I think he is more suited to be a depth safety. But for everything that he is, his fit in this defense, he's reliable, he's responsible. And that's tremendously, as unsexy as it is, it's tremendously valued in this defense. He is where the coaches want him to be and expect him to be, and where his teammates want him to be and expect him to be. And that matters a lot. But he has such a fine line and small margin for error with angles of the ball and plays on the ball and coverage because of his limitations athletically and as far as just overall juice and quickness and burst goes. I understand the push for him, and I echo, again, similar sentiments. Like, I do think he has a high floor, and I think having a high floor and a known quantity is important in high leverage games in the playoffs. That matters a lot. But it's Bishop for me along with Rapp. If I had to like put a number on it or quantify it, I'm about like 55-45 in favor of Cole Bishop. Yeah, it's close. And it's because there is still that little risk a little bit, and you saw it, he got beat for the touchdown against the Jets. You saw him get out leveraged slightly against Hunter Henry on a 3rd and long. It's just some of those missteps when he's, taking angles or just kind of, he's a little too, he wants to play outside leverage, but he's a little too far outside and he gives up leverage inside and just puts himself in positions that you would prefer him not to be. But his skill set and what that allows the defense to do from a coverage standpoint, from a disguising standpoint, his athleticism and juice they can just, swap and rock and roll safeties and rotate literally on the snap. And he can go from being in the box or almost around the line of scrimmage to all of a sudden get into the post and playing as a single high safety in the blink of an eye because of his athleticism, and his ability to play in the box, play coverage. I just think that his skill set starts to unlock more things for the defense, acts as a bit of a force multiplier. And when we're talking playoffs, You're going to play teams in the AFC and potentially in the Super Bowl if you get there, that want to put you in a bind from a personnel standpoint. So I will take the rangier, more explosive, more scheme versatile, slightly bigger guy in Cole Bishop. Even though there is some risk that comes with it, I'm going to take him for this playoff push because of what his skill set and traits offer. And then, if you want to put a little, more juice on it too, get him some more time on task. One of the phrases you use, get him some more time on task for next year. And then maybe you start off on an even higher note for year 2 for Cole Bishop in this defense.
I think the big variable for me that puts me in the Bishop camp is I just think he's probably the best box safety this team has. That's what I loved most about him at Utah. I thought he was really good in the box.
Yes.
And,
I wanted him to go to a team like the Patriots or the Ravens who use safeties in a multitude of ways. I thought he was best as an apex, nickel hybrid monster man type of dude. The closer he gets to the box and in and around the line of scrimmage, sideline to sideline from the first down marker down to the line of scrimmage, I think that's where he's best suited. So yeah, I echo that completely.
When you can insert that into your run fit and the Bills are going to play a lot of light boxes, I feel like that helps your defense. One of my favorite things about Cole, in addition to that, at Utah was man coverage reps against tight ends. And you mentioned a couple of reps against Hunter Henry. I know the two plays you're thinking of. One, I just thought he needed to get hands on, right? It was if you get hands on, that's probably taken off the menu and the May's going to work to a different option. And then the other, he was playing with 15 yards of depth one-on-one against Henry. It's man, I'm not sure Ed Reed's covering Hunter Henry on that particular play. But again, it's something that I think he's got a good foundation for. And those are the reps, right? Those are the ones you want, good coachable reps to grow from. And I think there's been a good path of growth in season from Cole Bishop. Because come on, man, the Houston game was a disaster. And it's good to see him playing good ball and us being in agreement that he should start next to Rapp.
You see him coming down now. He went from the Houston game to having that miscommunication that leads to the Nico Collins touchdown to right off rip in the game against the Lions. He's coming into the box and he's barking and communicating. You see hand signals. And it's not just him looking to Bernard or somebody and being oh, okay, got it. He's doing some dictation. He's being very vocal. That's a huge sign for that growth mentally and what he's able to kind of do from understanding the game.
And you wonder if he didn't have the injury, it kept him out a good amount of time in camp and preseason. Maybe this has been his opportunity all along. So I guess maybe it's here. I want to get into one more here. I don't think this is kind of flying under the radar. Each of the last 4 weeks, the Bills have had a different defensive tackle inactive. And Sean McDermott said this past week, or I guess maybe last week, that they're trying to figure out, which five they want to go with on game day. We know Ed Oliver and Daquan Jones are 1 and 2, but there's 3 more. And it's this group of Dwayne Carter, the rookie, Quentin Jefferson, Jordan Phillips, and Austin Johnson. And those 4 players have taken a turn each of the last 4 weeks being inactive. And I think it caught everyone's attention the last 2 weeks when it was Dwayne Carter and Austin Johnson. But this has been something they've been tinkering with. Who's the guy? 5 are going to be active. Who's the one guy for you that you feel should be the one that sits during the postseason? If it's not a matchup specific type thing.
This is going to sound like such a terrible answer. It's all of them are 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. I'm just very meh on the group. If honestly, I want Ilianku to play. I'm still disappointed that that didn't happen.
Brother, what are we doing? Right.
I know. It's just my thing with all of them is we know what they want from the defensive line, right? You have to have the ability to play the run. You got to be able to one gap, penetrate, get a field, but you got to be able to rush the passer at the same time. So they look for these varying body types, but you're just not getting anything from a run defense standpoint. You're not getting anything from Phillips. Dwayne Carter's getting blown off the ball by double teams. So is Austin Johnson. Jefferson isn't giving you much. And then when you look as a pass rush, Jordan Phillips has 4 pressures on 66 pass rush snaps. That's a pass rush productivity of 3.2. Dwayne Carter, 7 pressures on 132 pass rush snaps, a PRP of 2.9. Austin Johnson, 7 pressures on 132 pass rush snaps, a PRP of 2.9. Or I'm sorry, a PRP of 2.7 on 144 pass rush snaps with 6 pressures. And then Jefferson, 5 pressures, 65 pass rush snaps, a PRP of 5.4. A little skewed with some sample size and some coverage stuff in there. If I had to make one inactive, I guess it's probably Jefferson, even though his PRP is the best out of the guys I went with. But I don't like any of them.
Right.
And I had more hope for Carter coming out of Duke. My biggest question was like, could he handle double teams and anchor against them and hold his ground versus the run? But he had some juice and pass rush pop. There were a couple reps against the Jets where he flashed a little bit late, granted when it was Tyrod and the second teamers, but the first team line was still in there.
Mhm.
I guess it would be Jefferson for me, but I'm not confident in any of them in a multitude of ways. I'm very disappointed with the second and third wave of defensive tackles.
Yeah, I agree. And I thought that would be an improved component of this team because I thought pretty highly of Austin Johnson as a free agent pickup. And I like Dwayne Carter, the pass rusher. I was concerned about the run defense, but I've been pretty disappointed that he has really not had a pulse as a pass rusher this year.
Pass rush productivity at 2.9, 7 pressures all year on 132 pass rush reps.
Yeah. It's been a bad rookie season for Dwayne Carter. That'd be the guy I'd choose to have inactive because at least I have some level of experience with the other guys.
Fair.
And I think I don't know. It's a rough group and obviously something that needs a lot of attention in the offseason. We'll be curious to see how the Bills treat that, but I think those are the 3 things that they're trying to solidify here as they get ready to host somebody next week in the wild card round of the playoffs. All right, coming up on the other side of it, Anthony and I are going to start to talk about some of the more group-oriented conversations, the pass rush, man coverage, run defense in particular. Folks, be sure to stick with us. It's playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to make the most of these last final weeks of the football action. That's where Prize Picks comes in. If you love football and want a chance to win real money while watching the games, Prize Picks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With Prize Picks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns, and for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds. And whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or want to cash out quickly, Prize Picks has got you covered. And with over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear that people are loving this platform. I've been playing for a while now, and I'm having a blast. It's so easy to use, and I love how fast the payouts are. Seriously, I've gotten paid out in as little as 15 minutes when my picks hit. Plus, the weekly promos like Taco Tuesday discounts add even more value to my lineups. Here's a special offer right now for Locked On NFL listeners. You can download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's Prize Picks. Run your game. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What do you want your 2025 story to be? Every January brings a new chapter, 365 blank pages waiting for you to fill. If there's a part of your life you want to rewrite or a plot twist you've been craving, why wait? Life isn't about fleeting resolutions. It's about taking control and becoming the author of your own story. Think of therapy as your personal editor, helping you craft the life you deserve. It's not just for crisis situations. Therapy can help you develop healthier coping strategies, improve your relationships, and empower you to be the best version of yourself. Whether you're facing a challenge or just looking for personal growth, therapy is a powerful tool to help guide your journey. Whether it's learning how to set boundaries or tackling stress in new ways, therapy can help you develop skills for a better tomorrow. Even if you've never tried therapy, the benefits are clear. Finding someone to talk to and gaining fresh perspectives can make all the difference in navigating life's ups and downs. Write your story with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOn. My guest today is Anthony Prohaska. You can follow him on Twitter, X at @pro__ant. He's the outstanding host of the Disguise Coverage podcast with Cover One. Also does a bunch of work over there. Just follow this guy. You'll love his content. He knows ball. He's a ball knower. He knows the Bills. So he has my full endorsement. Anthony, let's talk about some of the group elements of this defense. I want to start with pass rush. You kind of got into some of the problems, right? You're not getting much at all from the second and third waves on the interior. You're still probably looking for more from the starters. What are some of your thoughts here on this pass rush entering the postseason, and how can Bobby Babich get the most out of what he has?
Oh, very good question. For me, it starts with mitigating the run and forcing offenses into more true drop back and or known passing situations. It's always harder to rush the quarterback if you're coming off a play action. You have to play the run on the way to the quarterback and all those pieces and any other kind of elements that get you away from a true drop back. So you need that in your favor. overall. So kind of like high level. I think also within that, more just individual wins up front, in particular, like your starters. You need Ed Oliver to start to maintain those flashes that we've seen the past couple of weeks. Like if you can get that interior pass rush pop to go with what you've got from Greg Rousseau, what you've seen from Von Miller, what you've gotten from AJ Epinesa at times, like some flashes there. I don't think Daquan Jones is going to get back to that guy who looked like an all-pro last year. Ed Oliver is starting to show some more juice, though, each of these past several weeks, starting really with that Detroit game when he had Glasgow in hell and got like 7 pressures out, or 7 of his 10 pressures came against him in that game. So Ed Oliver starting to win one-on-one. Schematically, I know what the pressure numbers look like for several of the players up front in a positive way, but I just don't have faith that they can consistently win with the traditional 4-man rush down in and down out. I would like to see more simulated pressures and creepers. That way you still have numbers and coverage. That way you can kind of play some games, dictate some protection, maybe force the offense to keep a tight end into block, keep a running back into block. This also ties into Matt Milano being in this lineup and how good he is coming forward and playing into those sims and creepers and timing the snap. Bernard is tremendous at this as well. Just him blitzing in general for Bernard. He comes forward like a heat-seeking missile. So it's really kind of winning situationally, winning on first and second down, and not being in this kind of Bermuda Triangle, no man's land on third down where the offense has a multitude of possibilities, starting to get more one-on wins, particularly inside, particularly from Ed Oliver, and then give me more schematic variation. Give me some sims, give me some creepers. I would be okay with some 5 and 6 man pressures, although they haven't been great at those this year. So yeah, give me just some more schematic variants, start to open up the menu a little bit and trying to get creative. If you, again, unless they can all of a sudden start winning with the traditional 4, I just don't see that happening consistently.
Yeah, I don't think that just straight up 4-man rush, beat your guy. That's just not the recipe for this group. I agree with everything you said. The point that I want to drill a little bit more was really what you opened with, and you were talking about getting teams into true drop back passing situations. I mean, that's the reality. The Bills' best way to help their run defense, the best way to help their pass rush is to score, is to have leads. You saw that. I mean, contrast, go back to the Miami game where it was 31-10 or something. And the way that the Bills pass rush was able to really affect that game in the second half compared to the first, when, you're just being able to tee off, it's a lot different. Think about that second half against the Jets and just how much the Bills are able to take advantage of playing with a lead and teeing off. And so that's going to be tough in the playoffs. Everyone's good. But if you can get leads, obviously that's going to help your defense. Because I think you can hear from Anthony and I that the Bills don't have, real big time difference makers that are going to consistently dominate one-on-one matchups. They certainly have some good players, Oliver, Rousseau in particular, but there's no Chris Jones, there's no Myles Garrett, there's none of that. And so the Bills have to help, whether that's by scoring or, how do you put them in situations that maximizes their skill sets with different pressure looks, different stunts to get the most out of the group. One thing that's happened with this defense down the stretch is you've seen a more of an increased appetite for man coverage. And the splits are really good, Anthony. When the Bills run man coverage, it's very, very good. And I'm sure a lot of that is probably because they're choosy with it. I don't think that running more man coverage means that if they run man coverage 20% of the time, that if they just did it 60% of the time, that you just take the 20% results across 60%. Yeah. I don't think that's how it works. I think there's been some good situational moments with it. What are you seeing when the Bills are running man coverage, and kind of what are some of your thoughts on how that can apply in the postseason?
I like it when they do work it in, especially, it really starts with just who they have at the outside corner spots with Benford and Rasul Douglas. You've got big, physical guys who welcome contact in the run, but also in terms of just jamming guys and playing press, whether it's a soft shoe press or a true press. And so I would like to see them work in more man, more on third downs. Actually, kind of like a little bit of what they did briefly against the Jets. They got creative with a couple man looks. They had a really nice 2-man variation against a 3-by-1 where Devontae Adams run. They're essentially trying to run like a screen over the middle to a degree with some obstruction and interference for Devontae on 3rd and 9. And Benford is up on Adams, and he and Rapp communicate, and they're just playing 2-man, and Adams goes on the over, and Rapp slices and drives on him, and Benford replaces him as the deep half player over the top. Rodgers looks for Adams and sees Rapp coming, holds onto it, tries to make the throw across his body. It goes over Lazard, and that's the one that Benford drops. That's the interception that Benford drops in that game, makes up for it later. And then they had another almost kind of like a cover one double robber, like 2-hole player, but there was no post safety, and they were just using it to bracket essentially and pass off on the crossers against Devontae and Garrett Wilson. So I like that, the little schematic variation with it. I would like them to lean into man overall just because of what they have at the outside corner spot, the variations they've shown, the schematic capability behind it. And I just think with the receivers they're going to see in the playoffs and the offenses they're going to see in the playoffs, lean into that size and physicality you have at corner on the outside, beat the hell out of these opposing wide receivers every chance you get. Again, mix it in more on third down just because of how it can muddy your run fits potentially, but also within that, I do think they're going to have to run blitz more to stop the run. And so they can do that and play man behind it if they want to work more man coverage in or attack-minded defense on early downs if they pair those two things together. So I am wondering if it upticks a little bit or if they stay choosy with it, like you said. But I hope it's employed, whether it's in deployed in high leverage situations, because I do think it can be advantageous given how little they play it, but how creative they can be and the corners and skill sets and body types they have for it.
Well, and I think there's a pretty big tell on the Bills defense right now that if you get behind the sticks, which is the entire objective of what this defense wants to do, the Bills are going to kind of play a more of a soft shell defense and they're going to rally and tackle. And I'm kind of tired of seeing 2nd and 15 turn into 3rd and 4. You know what I mean? Like, so like on 2nd and 15, let's ditch quarters or cover 3. And let's talk about, is this a good opportunity to play cover 1? And instead of taking 2nd and 15 and turning that into 3rd and 4, how about we take 2nd and 15 and turn that into 3rd and 15? I think that would be better. But sometimes philosophically, I just don't know that the Bills agree with that. And I think that man coverage and some tighter alignments kind of forces them into making them earn everything as opposed to, okay, let's rally and tackle and not get beat deep. And I think that helps your pass rush too, because I think when you're playing with kind of softer alignments, I think that it's a lot easier to anticipate, I think, for quarterbacks. Whereas if guys are playing tight in the face and you're waiting for separation, well, you're going to have to, your processing speed's going to be different and how you work through your progressions. And so I want to kind of get those quarterbacks a little bit more antsy with how they're going to make a decision as opposed to, okay, here's free access. Let me take it. And let's see what we can get going on the 3rd down here. I want to talk run defense here to close out this particular segment, because it's been a topic, really for years. This year it's been heavy as the Bills metrically are very in a unique place where they're giving up yards per carry looks pretty bad. But if you look at some of the efficiency metrics like EPA per rush, the Bills actually have one of the best run defenses in the NFL. So Anthony, I invite you here today to tell us the truth about the Buffalo Bills run defense.
I love that you mentioned those pieces in the lead up, because if you look at it, like EPA per play and success rate and DVOA against the run, like all these advanced, yes, they're extremely strong. And I love advanced metrics, including several of those. Like I use EPA per play and DVOA like all the time. And I don't want to make it seem like they're lying or they're not telling the truth, but I just don't think that's the whole picture. And so you mentioned something earlier, a couple segments ago, talking about, when we were talking about the keys to like maximizing the pass rush, and you talked about the offense getting out to the early lead and then forcing the teams to have to throw the ball a little bit. You referenced that Miami game. I think the Bills' best friend when it comes to run defense is game script. Yeah. Like you need to force teams to stop running the ball, and you need to do that by just getting a couple stops early and then scoring touchdowns early and making it be 17-0 or 21-3 and making the offense go, all right, we got to pull.
Detroit game.
Exactly. And that will allow this defense to kind of, plug the holes a little bit that they have against the run, not by doing anything schematically, by just making teams not be able to run the ball. Because when teams are able to consistently run the ball, and this goes back to week 1 against the Cardinals, the Bills are just getting displaced, especially in the spine, vertically, horizontally. You got guys getting blown off the ball. You've got guys not working off double teams. More often than not, throughout the entirety of this year, even when they've adjusted, like we've seen some really bad run numbers for the run defense in the first half of games. Then they course correct in the second half. We know how good the Bills are as a team in the second half and how they adjust. More often than not, their adjustment is numbers in the box to gap out against the run and or run blitzing to stop the run or having some run stunts because they're not winning enough individual battles. And that combined with offenses using their upfield penetrating nature against them with gap scheme runs, specifically, trap and crunch. For those who don't know, crunch is trap plus wham. If you want to know what that is, it's the very first run from the Ravens offense against the Bills that Derrick Henry took to the house. You get the trap block from the guard, you get the wham from a card, and it's a house call. And Miami ran it against them. New England ran it against them. Ramondre Stevenson scored a touchdown on trap. So I think the run defense is more worrisome than the numbers indicate. And I know that's a big point. Anytime someone mentions the run defense isn't good or it's worrisome, a lot of people like to come out from the void and say, yeah, well, look at all these advanced metrics. I don't think the tape necessarily speaks to that strength, given how much they've had to use numbers and bodies to sell out for the run and how much game script has helped them and hurt them. And again, if you have to use bodies, if you're run blitzing and loading the box with numbers, you don't have numbers for coverage. Then you start to get into this limited type of coverage scheme scenario, what you can disguise, what you can't. It just, throw the ball to score, but run the ball to win. That's what offenses want to do. That's what so many offenses are going to do in the AFC. The Chiefs are going to run the ball. The Ravens are going to run the ball. If they face the Broncos in the wild card, the Broncos are going to run the ball. They're going to do it with some heavy personnel looks. So I am worried about this run game a little bit. And I do think so much of their success as a defense against the run will be determined by game script.
Yeah, I think game script is a great place to bring this conversation. And I think there's a Josh Allen factor in that you have to consider from the opposing team's perspective. Think about that Detroit game. The Bills are up 14-0, and Josh Allen's a quarterback. Boy, you better score. You better find yourself a way to get back into this game because 17 ain't going to stop, right? And I think that's probably why game script matters so much for the Bills is because Josh Allen is a quarterback, and teams come in. We see it, right? They want to shorten the game, limit possessions, keep Josh on the sideline. Well, when that's not going your way quick, I mean, how many times have we seen the Miami Dolphins do this where the Bills, okay, here's the 10-point lead, and all of a sudden Mike McDaniel feels like he's got to get it all back on one drive, and he can't score 10 points on one drive. And you saw the Detroit Lions fall into the same type of thing. So I think there's a Josh Allen factor that makes the urgency for a favorable game script to exist for you to maximize what you can do on defense. I think that's a huge part of the equation. All right, on the other side of it, Anthony and I are going to get into some of the bigger picture conversations with the unit in general. We're talking third downs, scheme trends, and if the reliance on those takeaways and big plays and high leverage moments can be continued in the postseason. Folks, be sure to stick with us. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. I love betting on which players hit the over on stat projections and if a team will cover the spread. I love building parlays. It's thrilling. Not only can you bet on who will win the game, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points each team will score, and so much more. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. As you know, we just had the rally on the river at Buffalo River Works, and that property is incredible. One of the coolest places I've ever been to. So much to do, plenty to eat, plenty to drink. It's just a great place to bring your family, go watch a game. So much going on over there. And I recently found out that their other location was the first brew pub in Buffalo, the beautiful red brick Pearl Street Grill and Brewery. Pearl Street just remodeled the main floor, so the dining room now converts into a stage for live music after Sabres home games on the weekends and even during brunches. You get live music all year round. And, of course, many Bills fans have been to weddings at Pearl Street or Riverworks, and their in-house wedding coordinators make the whole process easy, fun, and customizable. If you want an elegant, historic wedding with beautiful patios and sunset photos, that's no problem. How about a custom Buffalo Bills themed wedding? If you can dream it up, they can make it happen. And that's also true for holiday parties, corporate events, team building events, casual happy hours, all kinds of stuff. And look, if you're a sports fan, you can reserve groups to watch the games on the big screen at Riverworks. Or if you're headed to a Sabres game this year, be sure to stop by Pearl Street before, after, or during the game. Enjoy some live music, some crispy wings that are now made in tallow instead of seed oils. That's awesome. Or one of their new OM organic beers. Those are delicious. Check them out. Pearl Street Grill and Brewery. and Buffalo River Works, the most authentically Buffalo venues, from everything from dinner to live music to your perfect wedding. Visit pearlstreetgrill.com or buffaloriverworks.com. All right, folks, joined by the outstanding Anthony Prohaska of Cover One here today, talking Bills defense and some of the big topics for the unit entering the postseason. And Anthony, I want to talk third downs. I think this is probably the worst third down defense that Sean McDermott's had during his time in Buffalo. And I'm curious as to what your thoughts are as to why, if you agree with me. And, all right, well, you're running out of time, but you better figure this out pretty quick because there is no tomorrow come the postseason.
Yeah, so I want to lead off with a tweet I put out last week, Thursday. You commented on this tweet. We made some jokes about it. So the Buffalo Bills defense on third down, this was going into the game against the Patriots. I didn't pull the numbers again because one game isn't going to significantly change any of these numbers. 31st in EPA per play, 32nd in EPA per pass, 14th in EPA per rush, 17th in pressure rate, 18th in sack percentage, first in stuff percentage, which is runs that go for 0 or less yards, 25th in yards after contact per rush, 21st in yards before contact per rush, and 25th in rush yards over expected per rush. All of that coming on third down. So not great, not ideal. And I don't think most people even need to see or hear those numbers. Like, you just watch the games and you see offenses converting on third downs, or it's 3rd and 11 and they're getting like 9 or 10. And then it puts them in an advantageous spot to try and go for it on 4th or kick or do something, or they're just straight up converting on the third down. And I think a lot of it, you mentioned something related to this earlier. I just think you're more often than not, and too often at the same time, you're just seeing that disconnect between coverage and pass rush. You're just not seeing that marriage. There is just not enough time for the pass rush to get home because of what the coverage is doing on the back end, or the coverage is sound and guys can't get free and win a one-on-one and the quarterback's just sitting back there forever. And sometimes we see it blend perfectly where we get a coverage sack and coverage is beautiful and guys eventually get free. Or we see the opposite, like, again, against the Jets, Cole Bishop comes down from depth and takes away the glance to Garrett Wilson. Rodgers was expecting to spit it out. He can't. He looks left. Everything is covered there. He looks back right. Rousseau pops him and Daquan Jones pops him. And you start to get that marriage. I think that's been the biggest issue overall. There's little details and niche pieces within it, but it's just that disconnect between coverage and pass rush. And it's the combination of being a little too soft on the back end, along with being a little too predictable. And then something else we talked about earlier, just guys not winning enough individually, guys who just aren't getting you a bucket when you need to, some stunts and some two-man games that are sloppy more often than not, and just all of those things happening in conjunction one another consistently, and you see the poor results that they've manifested.
Yeah, like I responded to your tweet last week. Yeah. I mean, obviously the Bills are just saving all their best stuff for third down defense for the playoffs. None of this is anything to be concerned about, and it's fine. Yeah, this is totally okay. That's right. The Buffalo Bills are a big play defense. Like, make no mistake about it. They live and die on your mistakes and making you pay for those mistakes. I think you saw if you've watched the Bills this year, you know exactly what I'm talking about. They give up yards, and the next thing you know, they get a takeaway.
Look at even the first, even if it's not a takeaway, the first drive against the Jets offense, the Jets are just moving it down the field, and the Bills are chasing their tail. What happens? It's 4th and short. Group makes a play, and you get the stop, and it's an empty drive. And then the same thing on the second one. The Jets drive it right down again. Group tips it in the air. Jordan Phillips interception, and you forget about the fact that the Jets could have easily put up 14 points in those two drives.
That was 2 of their first half drives. The other was a safety. And so the Jets had 3 drives in the first half. They had no points. They averaged 6 yards per play. They had 7 first downs with only facing 1 third down.
Crazy.
They were moving the ball, man. They were moving the ball just fine against Buffalo. Can the Bills continue to rely on this style of defense? I've heard my whole life that, sacks and takeaways, they're random on defense. Well, I think that the last 8 years or whatever, 7 years of Sean McDermott has told us that there's not a randomness to this. And I think that I do believe them when they say that you get what you emphasize, and it's a big part of what they want to be. But it's also been what saved this defense's bacon, plenty of times this season. Can it continue? Dick Duran, this is Dick Duran's gene. He was I'll never forget Dick Duran was asked about this one year where the Bills were just getting an unbelievable amount of takeaways. And it was, they were off to a start that was uncharacteristic. And of course,
not sustainable.
Yeah, they blew it down the stretch. But I'll never forget Dick Duran when he was asked about, is this sustainable? And Dick Duran said, well, there's no law saying that it can't sustain. Well, Anthony, what do you think here? Can this continue?
It's funny about like coaching to that or emphasizing that, and then also tying in Dick Duran a little bit. One of the first teams that made me think turnovers were sustainable was, granted, he wasn't the coach of them at this time, but those Bears teams with Tillman and Urlacher and Briggs and Mike Brown at safety, the way they were constantly like ripping the ball out, punching the ball out, like constantly. I mean, the peanut punch is named after Charles Peanut Tillman, but Urlacher's always going for the ball. And you could tell like how much they emphasized it. And I think the Bills are in a similar boat. Like Benford is always trying to punch out the ball every chance he gets. For the lack of interceptions that he has, his ball skills are tremendous because of what he's able to do from a PBU standpoint and a forced fumble standpoint. Yeah. That play against Amon-Ra against the Lions where he goes for the punch, doesn't get it. Amon-Ra catches it, and as he's tackling him, he goes for it again and knocks it out. Oh, absolutely unreal.
Yeah.
And you can tell they emphasize that and they try to play to it. And they do play to it. I mean, overall, the turnovers and the takeaways, the forced fumbles, the recoveries, the interceptions, all of it. But at some point, it has to regress to the mean. Like at some point, I feel like you can't continue to live.
There's no law saying it has to, Anthony.
That is also true.
I think Dick Duran went to Yale, I'm pretty sure.
He's a very smart guy, and he will know more about football than, sincerely, I or you ever will. So, kudos to him for that. But at some point, I feel like it's got to regress to the mean. But also, all jokes aside, I could kind of see it not because of how they play. Like, and I love that you put this segment right after the third down issues segment, and you mentioned it in talking about the third down issues, is because their success with the turnovers, I think, is also tied to their failures in other areas on third downs or just overall in general, because they are playing this kind of, for as soft as they are in coverage, their ideology and philosophy defensively is like, you're going to get us, like we're going to get got, but we're going to get you more often than we get got. You're going to gash us for a 6-yard run or a 15-yard run, but then we're going to force a fumble or we're going to get a sack or a tackle for loss. And it's 2nd and 13. We're going to get you into these negative type and down and distances. This year, they just haven't been able to get the stops on third down after they get those. But it is such a, not necessarily a risk reward, but it is kind of this double-edged sword they play with defensively. Like, we want to get upfield, we want to penetrate, we want to be aggressive, we want to play on the forefront and the forefoot, but that's also going to leave us vulnerable. We're also going to be susceptible. It's going to be so hard for them to continue to rely on that as their main source. At some point, you need to be able to force 3 and outs, which they have not been good at. At some point, you need to be able to limit time of possession. You can't just play that turnover level game or, we'll give up yards, but we'll always hold them to 3 or we'll get the stop in the red zone. At some point, that's going to wear out. And I mean, you're playing really good teams in the playoffs. So if it's going to run out or regress, it would make sense that it comes against those good teams. But to your point, originally, I do think they do coach to it. And if anybody can continue it, I do think it's this team, given the players and how much they emphasize that aspect of football.
Yeah, they do. You can see it in how they play, man. And I love it. I love that part of this defense. I want to have a defense that values taking away the football, man. It's a big deal, but it would be nice to have just a little bit more stoutness to go with it. Let's close with this. I have written down in our outline scheme trends, but I want to give you the liberty to kind of take this wherever you want. The entire purpose of us having this conversation today was talk about the Bills defense entering the postseason. So whatever last thought, whatever prevailing thoughts on your mind that maybe we didn't get to, that you want to emphasize here, that's weighing on your mind for this team in the postseason, because man, it's not you've watched this team in the postseason. I do feel like, and it's against the Chiefs and Bengals, or these are good teams. I feel like the defense has been the side of the ball that's let the team down. I don't feel like this has been a Josh Allen didn't show up type of situation, or the offense didn't show up. Maybe you want a little bit more there, but I think primarily it's defense. What's that thought for you, man? What's on your mind?
The big one, it ties into a little bit with something I mentioned earlier, like the marriage of coverage and pass rush. Like that's what did them in against the Bengals, like in that playoff game. Good example. Like they were like, oh, we'll just give you all this space underneath. And Burrow was like, okay, thanks. Here, Joe Mixon. Here's like 75 catches. I'm just going to keep checking it down. Or we're going to run the ball against this light box and everybody's bailing out. And we're just going to get all these yards per carry and just gash you to death with that. So one, if they can marry the pass rush with the coverage better, and then tying within that specifically, like, do they tweak any of their ratios in any way? Like, they're 28th in blitz rate on third down. Do they blitz a little more? Do we see more simulators and creepers now that Milano is back? They're 28th in man coverage on third downs at 28.1%, which is actually 8 percentage points higher than their overall man coverage rate at 20.1%, which is 27th in the league. You know, you touched on that earlier. They've been choosy with it. Do we see that uptick? Do we see teams try to get them out of nickel and get them into base? And if they do they try to attack them with the run, or do they think, now we got them in base, let's do a little bit of what the Ravens did and try and pass them to death once they go in base? And then they're going to want to go back in a nickel, and then we're going to hammer them with the run. So how much is the blueprint of what this Bills defense is? We know it. The league knows it. They're a 4-down over front nickel defense, primarily going to play light boxes. We just talked about what they are philosophically and from an ideology standpoint. How much of that do they stay true to, and how much do they turn up certain dials, push certain buttons, and pull certain levers? And does it happen sporadically, or does it happen holistically? They're pretty close in terms of 2 high coverages and single high coverages. Do they flip drastically one, or can the game script allow them to flip drastically to one? I just wonder how much scheme ability and variation and variety we see from this defense, especially in juxtaposition with the offense that has thrown some run wrinkles in. Like, they already have a diverse run game, but now they're getting more, like, with the variations of they're doing with heavy personnel and how they're getting to counter. They're running traditional counter, but then also motion and Alec Anderson. And it just, what they're doing is very creative, running the ball on the offensive side. And we also heard Josh Allen and the coaching staff say, like, you know, we're keeping some stuff for the pass game in the bag a little bit. So the offense has the ability to be multiple, right, and hum and do all these things. And the defense is just like, no, we're just going to stay in our lane and do our thing. Do they start to buck some of their trends, either willingly or because they have to, because they're getting gashed and they need a response and they have to respond?
I hope that they do have some of those variables coming into play that maybe catches some of the opponents off guard here in the postseason. We're hoping for a deep postseason run. Let me ask you this, get you out of here with this question. Who's it going to be, Miami, Cincinnati, or Denver? Who's coming to Orchard Park next weekend?
Denver.
Yeah, I agree with you. They're not losing the Chiefs.
And if they should have beat them the first time. They should have beat them the first time, but it would be like, I don't know, Carson Wentz balls out and the Broncos. I just don't want to face a division opponent for a third time. I know it's, you know, laugh out loud Dolphins. I don't want them, and I don't want the Bengals. I don't want Burrow and Chase and Higgins and Lou Anarumo. I don't want it.
I agree with you. And I think there's a strong case to be made that Miami might be the best matchup for the Bills, but like you said, division team. And respectfully, I don't even want to sign myself up for the possibility of that being the way the season ends. That them crawling out of a 2-6 hole when Tua gets hurt against DeMar in that game, and they come back all the way and they get their first postseason win in 100 years against you to bounce you when you had the season that you did. And I don't need it. I don't need that.
Imagine Allen wins MVP, but they lose to the Dolphins in the wild card. No, and
can't live in that world. Can't live in that world.
I could picture him running for 250 yards on the Bills, but Tua throws 3 touchdowns. Everybody's like, Tua outduels Allen. I just can't do it.
Can't do it. Yeah, and I don't want Burrow. I don't want the Denver defense, but I want that the most of anything that's on the table. But we'll find out soon enough, Anthony. Man, I appreciate you coming on, dude. Always deliver a killer segment. Folks, make sure that you are listening and consuming everything that Anthony does. You'll be a better Bills fan. You'll be a smarter Bills fan. He knows ball. He takes all the emotion out of it. He's very objective about this football team, if you couldn't tell over the last 40 minutes of us having this conversation. So, as always, a great job, Anthony. Thanks for being on, man, and looking forward to our next conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you again for having me. This was awesome. I really hope I or we didn't jinx anything for the Bills going forward. And
we don't have that power, dude. We don't have that power.
Yeah, I'm so superstitious. You never know. But yeah, this was awesome. I appreciate the highlight. Thank you for having me. And good times.
All right. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you for being here and listening to this podcast. Have another conversation for you coming up on Saturday. Going to give you a bit of a preview. I know we didn't do our typical primer, but some thoughts on the game. Some analysis on what's at stake. I'll kind of get into some of the matchup probabilities, predictions, all kinds of stuff. So don't miss that coming on Saturday. As always, folks, I kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.